Hello, hey, I just realized the title I might be misleading. Barklord is not here, and it's a hangout, strictly speaking, but I'm just using it as a quick upload. But I'm replying to Barklord, and we're starting a conversation. Hopefully, we could sustain it. I think I would like to get into this. I've been trying to get into this for weeks and weeks and months, and Barklord shows up, rises to the surface again, and has some knowledge and opinions about this. And again, Barklord and I think, have a great history of disagreeing on things um, in a way I think is productive, right? It's good we aren't totally just of the same opinion on things. Um, and I generally find what you say, Barklord, always really excellent food for thought. Sometimes even the way you say it, right? Um, your attitude, the vibe. Also, I find very useful sometimes just the way you're like the what comes across as the emotional content of how you're looking at things. Sometimes I'm like, hey, I should look at this other problem with that attitude. You know what I mean? Even though maybe on the point I'd already agree or maybe I disagree. But it's really like, hey, that attitude that's being applied. And this is something I'd like to do. I'd like us to wander around, be able to ramble. I numbered this 0.1 because, forget 101.1. We're not telling that out. We're trying to learn the 101 in a science that is not reliable right now. It's not a science. And it is a science. They're trying to take scientific approaches to improving it, but it's like medical science back when everybody thought, well, leeches are probably, a good idea. Don't know if they work, but everybody says use them. And there's just so many confusing things that I think are a lot more clear. And it's not just Henry George. It's also that I found it difficult to read carefully the Adam Smiths, or I took political philosophy of politics when I was a philosophy student, and we read those things, and Rawls is more modern, but John Stuart Mill and the rest. But a lot of the stuff didn't click with me. It really was like when George, in his book Poverty and Progress, is describing what these terms mean: capital, labor, and land. He quotes Smith a lot, and Smith as well. It was an interesting thing is capital's not money. This is one of the liberating things. So on my little notes of that, because I'm going to miss some things you said. I let it wash over me. I'm not trying to avoid anything that it might look like I'm avoiding or something. Just bring it up to me again. Maybe it's hard for me to get, or maybe I was getting distracted. I was realizing, okay, little asterisks here. One, mostly I'm looking for work right now as a programmer as normal, but there's one job for creating programming courses, teaching programming. And interesting thing this guy was telling me is that they've done studies with this online courseware, like I think it's called edX or whatever, the MIT system. And people only watch instructional videos for like 3 minutes. That's, 3 to 6 minutes. And I'm like, really? But that's interesting because people that are self-taught, so I'm self-taught, and I know that, like, I was one of the kids in college, rare kid, that I liked lectures. When the professors, talk for an hour, I like that. But when they say something, not always, but there's some really smart people, and it's fun to, and they're riffing a lot. It's not like a script, so I find that interesting. But what will happen is if somebody says something interesting for 3 minutes, I'll be thinking about that for 10 minutes. Then when I tune back in, they're saying something else again. So if you have a really good lecturer that's saying something interesting every 3 minutes, for a self-taught person, it's good for that to be, short. And that somehow relates to our conversation, in that we should be able to focus on little things and then wander, and then, but anyway, the practical reason of bringing it up, that asterisk, is just that I watched your video that way, and I realized, oh, you say something interesting, and oh yeah, let's talk about the fact that the evil of money, or the affect of having this arbitrary currency kind of thing. You're right. He doesn't deal with that. I'll write down money. I'm probably thinking about that for a couple minutes before I tune in. So there could be a bubble, not because I'm avoiding things. Because also another thing is when people don't respond to certain parts of your points and videos, it could be more nefarious, even if it's subconscious on their part, but it can also be conscious that they're ignoring the stuff they don't like, the stuff that's messy for them, where the words have word traps and it'll get sticky for them. And so they void it. They have a blank spot. In my 20s, when I was really working on my psychology, and I thought there's something wrong in here, it was because I noticed there were void spots. There were things that when I looked at and thought about, when I came back into my rest state, I remembered less. It was less clear than other things that I did that I loved and was interested in. And it made those dim, and I had to shine light in and figure out why I was afraid of that stuff or whatever. So it could be both reasons. There could be things you said, or you talked about the unevenness in your hypothetical of a class situation, and I think I got some of the points, but I think there were points in there that I missed. There were gists that I missed. So anyway, enough preface on that. So with money, I think you're right about he doesn't address the fact that there might be a problem with abstracting money the way we do now. For example, fiat currency would still have a big problem. There's a monopolization, paying interest. There's other crimes besides the monopolization of rent in private, of land in private hands, of a finite, the main resource of the planet. So money. On the other hand, I found it really liberating, this idea that, capital isn't money and wealth isn't money. Wealth is stuff. Money almost doesn't count because it's just a way of transferring wealth, things created by humans. If you make 15 pairs of shoes, distribute them, sell them, trade them, give them even to people in your town, if you exchange, then those shoes are wealth. The fact that a guy has money and gives you the money, well, the money is when you give somebody else wealth, you get some tokens. So it's like, I can hold this. It's not really wealth. It's not really capital. A bunch of money doesn't help a business get started. It's what you buy with the money. So the real capital and the real labor, the real land, all of these things are separate from money. Money is not an accounting, a scoring system. It's just an interchange thing, like a network packet, how you and I can communicate. It's a medium of exchange. There might be ways to do that better. I don't know how different they would look. I personally am a big fan of the idea that you would have a commodity-based money system, that the currency is based on not the gold standard, but a commodity standard. There might be other ways to do it. There might even be possible to have no money at all, and instead of money, you have a barter, eBay banking kind of system, where you deposit chickens and you can take them out as shoes because of a complicated thing that'd be much like currency, but it could be built straight into a barter system. And this is one of my ideas, and people could steal because I think it's good enough to do anyway. I'll probably not get around to it, but I think somebody should make a website like eBay that's a barter website, right? Because the problem with barter is finding one person that has the chickens and you got the shoes. That's hard. But if you have 100,000 or 1 million people, it's easy to find the guy that wants this, the guy that wants that, the guy that wants that. The computer can trace out a link, and everybody sends the thing to the right guy and gets what they want. And I think, you wouldn't have money in that case, but you are replacing money with something. So there's this function of exchange. What I like about the Henry George system with respect to money is it removes the focus from this storage abstraction into, no, capital is the stuff you buy for your business to make more stuff, right? So you have land, labor, capital. They work, they combine with labor to create some product, and that product is the wealth. And another important point that he points out is you're not being paid from the capital, right? The capitalist money gets turned into the factory machines and the factory itself and the safety goggles and all of that stuff you use to do the production, right? That's the actual capital, right? So it de-emphasizes money as such and points out that, well, as land capital or any of these things, and if you're paying rent, wages, or interest, you're not really paying in money. Money is a medium of exchange, but in reality, if people work in a car factory, they're being paid in cars or car parts or whatever. Obviously, since the person they work for is going to sell cars, they just sell a car and give the person money. Really, what they've given them is part of the produce. Hey, I'm going to skip ahead to point 3. You were talking about the risk. Now, this is a really interesting thing he pointed out, because we always talk about the idea that people that loan you money, which we confuse for capital, but if you're going to use it for personal things, they're loaning you wealth. If you're going to use it for business or exchange purposes, then it would be capital. But anyway, that interest is not because of risk. That's not why people get interest. Okay, that is totally wrong. He proves this really well in Poverty and Progress. And while he's doing it, he points out, for those that think interest is evil, because I always thought it was funny, the idea that you would loan money to somebody and there is no interest. How could you expect that? Maybe if you're related, you have extra reasons. But anyway, the reason for interest on capital, and mind you, again, the interest is paid out of in cars for the car factory. The capitalist that gives capital to create cars, he's actually paid in cars. He might not want cars. He might not want to sell the car himself. So the company decides to keep the car and gives him money. The money at that point represents the cars he would have gotten, and then he could spend that on whatever he wants because it's a medium of exchange, right? Okay. So he's being paid in the product. Everybody's being paid in the product, right? So the landlord is being paid what we call rent, but that could be just the value of land, selling land. It doesn't literally have to be rent. Selling land is like selling the right to collect the rent to somebody else. And the value of the land sale price is in the ability to collect rent. So rent's a general term. Wages is whatever. And they are paid in cars. It can be turned into money, but really in the structure of the economics, they're paid in cars, their rent, the wages, same, and the interest. Now, why do the people get the interest? And the reason is because let's say somebody has a printing press and you have a pop-up zine you write in the summer. So he loans you the printing press. So you're gonna have to pay interest. What are you gonna pay interest in? Well, you're gonna have to give him some of the zines and he'll have to sell them, but you already sell them. So you give him money. Why does he get that interest? Well, it's because he not only could he have used that himself, that machine, not only are you wearing it out, but let's say it wasn't going to get worn out, and he could have used it himself. He also could have just, instead of building that machine, he could have obtained some rabbits. And in the summer, while you were using his machine, he could have started out with 4 rabbits and ended up with 20 rabbits. Right. And if you take the fact that for productivity, we have this choice to trade one thing for another, some things, the reason there's interest is a kind of an averaging of, in general, from the bounty of the earth, mind you. If I have seeds, I can raise flour. Right. So if I give you the seeds, I'm going to want some of the natural bounty back. That's where interest comes from. That's at least the justification of interest. And a lot of the monopolization, I think he's correct, that you see in capitalists is really because they're also the landlords, right? It's a mixing of those roles that we should separate back out. Now, the monopoly you were talking about in the room, I think the situation would change because if that's a metaphor for our nation, a person, once somebody owns their desk, that's like owning the land. And in the Henry George system, until the earth runs out of land, which in a way isn't going to happen, right? Go to New York. There's tons of fucking abandoned buildings, right? When I was in New York a while ago, the cops were busting into a 4-story abandoned building because they thought they saw a candle flicker. Somebody that reported it. There's tons of empty buildings. That kind of thing wouldn't happen, because if a poor person moved to a rural area, they would have to come up with hundreds of thousands and tens of thousands of dollars at least and buy this land, whereas instead they could go rent that land for next to nothing, possibly literally for nothing. I mean, in times in history in the early 19th century, when you could homestead, and we should have more homesteading kinds of things, and people could actually just go there for the occupation because it would raise the value of the land in the long run. It would generate tax revenue, but people for a generation or whatever would have this opportunity to go in for the price of land, and under equal opportunity rights, um, obtain that land without a full purchase price, but just because they were able to pay this rent, which would be very low. And rich people that didn't want to pay taxes, they could do the same thing, because you're only taxed on the land value and you're not taxed on any of your improvements. You could build, maybe this would be a problem, Barklord, for you, but you could build $1 million mansion and pay almost no taxes if you're willing to go do it out in the middle of nowhere. Now, I have a feeling that a lot of rich people that can afford it are still going to want their penthouses in New York, right? And so they will have to, and so it's a very progressive tax towards wealthy people, but not just because you're wealthy or happen to have wealth, but because you are reserving for yourself use of valuable real estate. So whomever is in a position to reserve for themselves the most valuable of the real estate will fund the government the most, right? And I've started running some of the numbers. Now, it's hard to get the value of real estate unimproved, but like just personal homes that people live in, it's like $13 trillion. Now, that's the improvement as well, the house on there. What's the land worth? I don't know, $1 trillion or something. But that's just personal real estate. What about all the business real estate and all the unimproved land? And there's no problem if a building falls down or burns up, or once it's torn down and that lot's cleared, even in a busy city like Paris or San Francisco or New York, it's possible to figure out what the cost of the unimproved land is. And often a different person will own that trade center land and lease it in long, like 100-year terms to the people that own the buildings. So the improvement to the building is already owned separately from the unimproved land. So the math is really straightforward. As a matter of fact, it's probably the easiest math to do. And a big part of his point is that this will help avoid corruption that you get when there's too many loopholes and strings to pull. It's too easy. You can't hide your real estate in the Cayman Islands, right? So I think what you have is that the poorest people will find, people like me, I would move out to the country. I would take advantage of this flexibility. And it's the same thing with starting businesses and whatnot and property for that. And you would have more of a dispersion that definitely helped poor people be above a poverty line and to have benefited from the securities that we as a species have gotten. Now, you're not going to eliminate that there's some people that are way richer, and you're not going to eliminate those people trying to screw over the worker or workers trying to screw over them. You're going to have these dynamics. It's not going to solve everything. And maybe you're onto something that, yeah, the system is not complete. It doesn't go far enough, or let's say there's problems we've seen that it doesn't solve. For one, it talks about ecological management is possible in this system, but it's also clear that this is a pretty pro-development system because, yeah, people given free access to the land around them, and people, it being too expensive to hold on to land that you're not going to use, the land would move to people that were going to use it, and you'd see development. Now, I believe that's something he doesn't deal with. We should deal with it. We know about ecological rules and whatnot, and that's something he doesn't cover. So that he doesn't go far enough, maybe that's true, but I think he's got the perfect first point, because when we think a little bit like a conservative capitalist, typical philosophy, or a libertarian, it's like, well, here's the right principles, this is how we should run things, and some people starve, it's their fault. Well, you and I don't agree with that. We believe in a social system. The purpose of having a social economy, sure, some people might think it's so that there's people around that I can make money off of. But if you look at the big picture, I think you and I agree, no, it's to bring everybody up. We should all be as protected as the cells in your body are, distribute the nutrients. And it doesn't mean that everybody has to be equally wealthy. It doesn't mean that people won't vie for lovers or be bought out of something they thought they had first dibs on, or it doesn't mean that. And maybe there's some of those things that we can do on top of it. However, I think he's got a really good point. He gives the conservative economic side of things credit to point out that, hey, if you tax luxury yachts, they're going to make less luxury yachts, and the people that work there are going to lose their job, and et cetera. The ripple effects. Anything you tax, you're going to deter, you're going to change the supply of things when you tax it, usually. But that can't happen with land. If you tax land, there's going to be the same supply, same demands to use it and everything else. So you could obviously tax it too much so that it would be, you would make the land not profitable to use. But that's the situation we're in now. People hold huge, freeways made across the United States. The real estate all along Highway 80 has gone up. It's still empty as shit. Empty as shit, but the speculation, people hold on to that land for decades, hundreds of years. The people that can hold that kind of land, they don't need to use themselves. And if they have to pay a rent, they drop that land. People do drop land just because of the taxes. If they had to pay more of a rent to hold on to that land, they would certainly have a plan of when they were going to use it, or probably would use it, right? So and just, the bottom line that clicked with me too is this Jimmy McMillan, the rent is too damn high. There's such a ring of truth of that. Partly it seemed like humor, but no, it's really true. And among progressives and working class people in the cities and political people, this rent and rent control and how you're treated by landlords is a real deal. Like the old Eddie Murphy, keep my land low. There's a gist there, and I think the reason is because we know this. Land is like air, and monopolizing it the way we let people monopolize it now just is not right. Land is the one thing that's worth taxing, and I can tell you that I would happily pay the tax in New York if I had the money to go live in New York and I wanted to live in New York, or in some, I like being out in rural, but rural isn't always cheap. To live in some beautiful rural place with great schools and a spa for everybody, and some fancy dancy thing where the land was valuable, of course I would live there. I would imagine anybody with the resources would go ahead and live there. But I, as a working class person in various times of my life, I would definitely go where I had easy access. When I was raising my kids and I went to Hawaii, that all turned out shitty, but that was part of the idea. I just wanted a place to have a respite and raise my kids. I was willing to leave my career in the city behind at that point because I thought, well, that's part of the problem, that rat race, which is a whole nother issue actually about having the hippie parents kind of thing. It just miscalculate what the real problems are, and I was subject to that. Though, it's my fault. Once you're a person, you're a person. When you see where your problems have come from, it's still you. But anyway, but I would, have moved happily 40 miles away to a place where I could have owned my own land, because also I'm from California and we have land claims, or in Hawaii there's leases. You can lease from the government. In a gold claim, you could go, and you could still do this. You go when the claim comes up, you go get the claim, and you have to improve the land. Like $500, which means cutting down some brush or make a little cabin and stuff. You have to improve the land theoretically, for the mineral rights. But so when you would get these leases, and then there's ag leases, there's people that make Kona coffee, and their family has a lease that has to be renewed every 99 years. It's just like ownership, but the government gets the rent instead of Donald Trump, right? And even Donald Trump's not going to lose all of his wealth, because the buildings he's built on the land, he could still rent, so-called rent. People can pay him money to use that, but that building's actually capital, and that rent is actually interest for using the capital. And the rent on the actual land would be the land tax and would go to the government. And I think my wife is going like, but how could people ever do this? I think there's certain good things because it doesn't fall into the capitalist versus communist thing, which I think is good. But it's really, there's a simple way to look at it, which is the proposal is get rid of income tax, get rid of tariffs, right? And sales tax, get rid of sales tax. You have some fees, licensing type fees, for using the airwaves or hunting, those do not collect revenue. Those are mostly accounting purposes and to defray certain costs, like keep doing the accounting of how many hunters there are this season, and just have a land tax. And you've got trillions of dollars of land value in the United States unimproved. So the money is there. And I've been calculating, if I didn't have to pay income tax, I'm like most people. I could pay 30% on an improved, on the full price, including the house, the improvement on the land. So given the value of the empty land, yeah, I could pay 20-30% of that, no problem. I'd be paying less taxes because of all the sales taxes and the compounding of the sales taxes. So I think it works out really straightforward. I think one thing I've really liked about it is it's given me a better attitude about what money really is. And because I've always thought, and maybe it's a common progressive economic insight, there's way too much focus on money. When you want to go after money, that's what becomes the emotional thing. And really, people want to spend the money, and yet some people want to pile up the money. They want piles of money way more than they can even keep up with spending, which is pretty weird for a working class person to think about, but we know that it happens. So I feel like people should be focusing more on the stuff, and this helps me do that, because capital, if anything, seemed like a synonym for money. Really, no, it's wealth. It's stuff you use in your business, but not really in your business. It's not about being a business. It's about if we're exchange, right? It's when you're cooperating with other people making stuff, systems of production, right? So that's liberating to realize my computer here that I bought for my business, that's my capital. The money I have in the bank, it may or may not be capital. I'm eating, it's wealth. It represents wealth. It represents the software that I've created for people. Anyway, I wanted to, and I do want to do that. I think that to the degree, let me summarize this way, or finish. Yeah, summarize this way. Conclude this way. Because I'm not going to summarize, but I think the situation, removing the monopolization of land from private hands, would improve the working class situation so well. For one, you probably would solve homelessness this way. Just this way, right? Because that's what they're being monopolized off of. But anyway, that might be something interesting to talk about. But you would be improving that situation well enough that they would give them a more even footing with capitalism, with capitalists, than we've ever seen. And you might be right, it might still be an uneven one for various reasons. But it's like being at a mountain that's steep, but you can climb it, as opposed to a mountain that is vertical and can't be climbed at all. So maybe that's the metaphor. Anyway, nice talking to you. I'd like to keep talking about this. And also, please join in. I really have been wanting to talk about this for a while. And it's in an exploratory way. I don't think all of these are conclusions. I'm trying to make sense of it myself. But having said that, I do feel like there's sort of a click of, I see how this stuff is working now. And yeah, some of the problems we have are really straightforward, simple. Like when you put the coordinate system in the right place, and the shape has a simple mathematical explanation. When you put the sun in the center, everything's a bunch of ellipses. A lot easier to do calculations than when the earth is in the center and everything's spiraling, right? I feel like our economics has been Ptolemaic. We've been looking at it from the landlord's point of view. Why does everything shake around? Why am I getting knocked around? It was because that's not the real center. The real center is where the land, like the air and the water and all the resources, are a public resource, the only public resource, this planet. Luckily, it's massive. And if we could do something to stop that monopolization of land and that waste of land, any fear that we're going to go develop someplace that's being left alone now, that hey, maybe it'd be better left alone from ecological points of view. Yeah, what about all those empty buildings in New York? What makes sense of that? Anyway, if those people had to pay basically the same rent to the government that the people with working buildings are getting rent from their tenants. Not at the full amount, of course, but the land tax, how much they're paying just for the land, not to be in the fancy penthouse apartment, not that part. They would not leave those buildings empty. They would get released back to the government, and people would come in and do stuff with it. I mean, it's New York, and also I am pro-development. I'm a Whig. I believe in infrastructure. We need to rebuild. I just want to build freeways with, animal safety tunnels underneath when that's appropriate. And, I want to make it ecological, but I believe we can have a green utopia technologically, and that our problems that are poisonous are our attitudes towards each other, not us making a big colony, which could be quite nice with lots of trees where there weren't trees before and whatnot. So, imagine we took all the money from war, this trillions, and we just were like, and we could just spend it, but we spent it somewhere else. It'd be like, we could put trees out in the desert. We could, there's so many frivolous things that would make the world nicer for people that seem frivolous. Desalinization plants, things that we know how to do but just seem too expensive, while it's not too expensive to go kill people and make them hate us even more. Kind of weird. I think that poisonous parts are people's attitudes, and we should sort this out. There's so much emotion in the unfairness of the economic system that that's another thing to wade through, and another reason I like talking to you, because you are a man with emotions that you seem to be the master of. You might deny that, because I know you struggle like we all struggle with situations, frustrating, but the way you handle them is pretty top notch. So anyway, yeah, take care.